I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode we're going to focus on health and safety, a topic that should be of relevance to all times of the year. To do this I'm joined by Teagasc Health and Safety Specialist Francis Bligh. We start the podcast with Francis discussing some of the HSA figures for accidents that have occurred in agriculture in the past 12 months, and in particular the trends he sees in the sheep sector during that period. It's a stark reminder of the dangers encountered in the industry. Francis discusses some of the steps that can be taken to improve personal safety, in particular how to reduce the risk of zoonotic infection from livestock. We discuss safety around farm machinery, in particular safe transport on roads, something very key at the moment. And Francis also highlights some of the risks associated with ATVs or quads in particular, something we see more on sheep farms. We move on to farmyard safety, with Francis offering his advice on some areas to focus on during the winter months, and he also outlines the various TAMS grants and capital allowances available for investment in farm safety equipment. We move on to discuss the resources available for farmers to improve their awareness of some of the issues and help get some of that practice change. Finally, we finish up discussing farmers' own health and mental well-being, with Francis offering some very sound advice in this area. This is a slightly longer episode of our podcast, but given the topic and its relevance, I think it's worth listening to the very end, as Francis offers some very good advice right throughout.
The Health and Safety Authority figures show that, sadly 20 people lost their lives due to farm accidents in 2019. And over the last 10 years, accidents related to tractors and vehicles accounted for about 50% of fatalities. Falls from heights accounted for 9%, falling objects 8%. Animal-related incidents were associated with 19% of deaths, and drowning, gas and timber made up the remainder. Now, the Health and Safety Authority figures show that sadly 17 people lost their lives so far this year, which is very tragic for those families.
It's a very high-risk industry we work in, and I suppose it's inherent in the type of work that's in it, but look, obviously any one of them is too many. Francis, do we see any difference in them figures on sheep farms specifically, or are there any areas that they buck the trend?
Well, the Teagasc National Farm Survey, which was published in 2017, shows that about 11% of sheep farms recorded an accident. The three most common causes of accidents in sheep farms were the tractors and vehicles at 33%, trips and falls at 27%, and livestock at 20%. But the interesting aspect of it is that trips and falls. So, the closest industry to sheep was the tillage industry at 16%. Sheep farmers do a lot of walking, a lot of manual handling. That 27% is quite high, and it's something that we need to be aware of and we need to do something about.
I suppose the one thing we need to be very cognizant of in all them figures, in some aspects, it doesn't reflect, the near misses that's out there, and the close calls, and thankfully the ones that didn't become included in them figures either.
Yes, Ciarán, for all those fatal accidents, there are numerous non-fatal injuries that occur. And for all those individuals, they result in time that they're not able to do their tasks the way they normally did. Some end up in hospitals. There is a lot of trauma really for that family trying to get around all those tasks and get them done in a way that makes sense, I suppose, to have labour there available to do it if a farmer gets injured.
In some aspects, Francis, there's a bit of a mindset change in this. What are the main areas to be vigilant about for the coming weeks?
So for the sheep farmers, it's coming up close to a busy period. For a lot of us, we're a lot of farmers busy checking sheep and feeding sheep and treating for fluke and preparing for housing. It's a time of the year where people are trying to get a lot of jobs done in preparation for housing and lambing.
In terms of personal safety, you mentioned there, there's long hours, there's a lot of work on your own. There's a couple of things there, what can we do to reduce some of the risk, or at least if anything does happen, have a backup plan in place for Francis?
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the main messages I try to talk to farmers about is about their own personal safety, first of all. So the importance of, before they go out in the morning or during the day or after dinner, just tell someone where you're going and how long you'll be gone. Especially this time of the year where, the evening comes in quickly. It is important, very important, to have a mobile phone with you, so that if something does go wrong, that you have a method of communicating with people. And it's very important, especially for sheep farmers, because many sheep farmers have to travel long distances to see sheep. They may be doing jobs that are far away from other places where there's other houses around, and some need to travel over rough terrain and up mountainous terrain, and some use quads. So it's all high risk. So it's important to have some way of communicating if things don't go the way you plan. The weather is also getting colder, and really it's important to make sure you have the right clothing there to protect you from the wind and the rain and the cold, because from a psychological perspective, you're not just as connected, you're not just as aware if you're cold or if you're wet.
And they're all very good and valid points, and seem simple, but they're often things that may be overlooked. Another aspect that's come into it, and something we've mentioned frequently even in last week's podcast, managing our time, maybe getting some of the jobs dealt with now and having a flock in healthier and better condition for later in the year. How important is that, Francis, in balancing our workload from a farmer health and safety point of view? Does it factor into it as well?
Ciarán, I agree with you in everything you've said there in relation to, to have a safe farm, it needs to be well organized. And for it to be well organized, at the end of the day, our objective is to produce that quality lamb for sale. How we do that through that process, there's a lot of, I suppose, decisions that we have to make. And, to make them decisions and make sure that the process is done in the best way possible, the most efficient way possible, will also make it a safer way. So what I'm talking about there really is that, at this time of the year, we're trying to make sure we have the fluke treatment in place so that, the ewes are in good condition. The body condition scores of the ewes are appropriate, that the ewe is in good, healthy condition when she's at the point of lambing, that the lambs are healthy, that she's plenty of colostrum, that she can go out, and start grazing, when she has lambed in a healthy state. Trying to reduce all those things will reduce your workload. And if you're able to reduce your workload, you won't be dealing with things like twin lamb disease, milk fever, grass tetany, all those things if the sheep is healthy. And you don't have to be dealing with them. You're going to be, your workload is less, and if your workload is less, your farm is going to be safer.
Just speaking of sheep being healthy, like the other risk, and it's a risk we work with all types of livestock on farms, there is a human health risk from picking up bacteria, organisms, a lot of zoonotic conditions that sheep have, and they can cause ill health, and in some cases severe ill health in humans as well. What are the couple of key ones of them, Francis, that you'd be worried about, and maybe just what kind of preventative measures can be put in place?
Well, I suppose, Ciarán, like all animals naturally carry a range of organisms, some of which, can be transmitted to humans. The main ones from a sheep farmer's perspective, I suppose, would be ORF, Toxoplasma, and zoonotic abortion. From an ORF, I suppose, talking about ORF, farmers can contract that disease by direct contact with infected sheep or contaminated objects such as, fences or feeding troughs, places where they're touching off, and you touch it and you pick it up. So ensuring general cleanliness of animal housing areas, of those feed troughs, making sure you're not in contact with that. Wearing your gloves when you're working with sheep is very, very important. Talking to your vet if you have an outbreak, maybe consider using the live vaccines, and wash down exposed areas with soap and water, and make sure you wash well after, use your gloves and wash well afterwards. The Toxoplasma, then obviously it's a big issue for pregnant women. Again, it starts in the gut of the male and female parasites in the gut of the cat. If a suitable host such as a human swallows it, then that infection can arise. And it's also a problem, I suppose, when sheep are aborting or lambing. So if a pregnant woman comes in contact with that material, that infection can transfer. So it's important to vaccinate sheep for breeding. One vaccination before their first breed provides immunity for life. So that's, a vaccination for the sheep that helps the sheep, but also from a disease transfer to humans' perspective. Again, you're back to the hand washing facilities are available and kept clean, that you're using gloves, you're disposing of, or you're making sure that, we'll say, the cat feces are kept to a minimum, controlling stray cats if at all possible. From the zoonotic abortion, when you're talking about that, I suppose we're talking about, it's again an infection risk for pregnant women. that are largely, it's, I suppose, when they're assisting in lambing due to risk of causing miscarriage. So trying not to have that happen, so that pregnant women are, aren't interacting with sheep at that point. Infection spreads from yo-to-yo and infected after birth, or maybe even, vaginal discharges, or from lambs that, just after lambing. So, precautions again are vaccinating sheep for breeding and ensuring that pregnant women are kept away from the lambing area.
I'm thinking too other aspect. There's others, there's salmonella, there's other things. You mentioned the washing, and even for males as well in that area, they are at risk of some of these conditions. The clothes and everything they're wearing too during that period really should, in theory, be kept separate and out of the household where possible. Yeah,
definitely, Ciarán. Like any place that material can be kind of, I suppose, brought into the fabric, and then that you make contact with that material again. So that needs to be a full process of thinking in relation to how you protect yourself and you minimize your contact with that material, and especially for those pregnant women, like, it's very, very important that there's no contact there.
That's probably that general hygiene is probably somewhere a bit more focusing given the year we're in. Like, just to maybe move it on, Francis, like the other aspect we see at the moment, machinery usage, and even feeding, fodder, and transport of fodder on the roads and livestock on the roads. It's more common at this time of year, but we're also working in a more risky environment, both in terms of the weather, but also in long, dark evenings. How, and you did allude to this at the beginning, but how big of an issue is injuries and accidents from use of farm machinery?
So from Ciarán, the tractors and machinery account for 50% of deaths on farms. So they are, the area that we need to work on to try and reduce those accidents in the agricultural community. I suppose we're at the moment, like, the main encouragement there is for us to say that tractors and machinery need to be well maintained. At the moment, I suppose some of us are finding the cold spell is really testing our starter motors and batteries. Are those tractors starting, on the key? And if they're not, are we doing something about it? Are we repairing those starter motors? Are we replacing the batteries? Are we making sure they're working? Because if you're out and you're trying to roll start tractors or pull start tractors, it's an activity that is high risk and must be avoided. The faulty handbrakes are also high risk. 54% of deaths of the are associated with tractors and vehicles have been a result of a crush injury. So some examples of tragic accidents are where drivers were crushed by a tractor that moved while the driver was busy opening a gate, attaching an implement. One where it was loading sheep. It's very simple activities, but just the handbrake failed and a tragic accident occurred.
It's quite stark, because that's a daily chore on a lot of farms, and it really puts it in context. Like, the other aspect in terms of road safety, like lighting the vehicles, even for general use around the yard, it is another risk at the moment. We see a lot of transport going on dark evenings, risky weather. What can be done to improve condition of agricultural machines in terms of road safety?
So what I'd say, Ciarán, is the most important thing is for the driver to be conscious of what they're doing and other road users. So, when they're bringing out their machines on the road, to be careful, to drive with caution, and to be aware that they need to be visible. So, it's legally required, or there's a legal requirement to have a flashing amber beacon. And, when they're out in when daylight is reducing, it's important to have those headlights and taillights in place, and also to have them on whatever they're carrying, whether it's an implement or a trailer. And if there's any loads on those trailers, they need to be adequately secure, and that nothing can spill on the road and cause an accident.
I suppose we can mention machines really without talking about the ATVs or quads. In reality, in sheep farms are probably a bit more reliant on them than certainly in other sectors. But there are another very high risk implement on the farm, and something we spoke briefly about with Francis Quigley in an earlier podcast. Unfortunately, they do account for a proportion of the fatalities and injuries we see in farms as well, Francis.
Yeah, and Ciarán, like, I suppose, as we're trying to reduce workloads, so a quad is great for helping, to make life a little bit easier on farms, and more farmers are getting them to do that. But the problem is that the HSA statistics will tell us that 19% of all farm vehicle accidents are associated with quads. It's important, I suppose, to be aware of that. Unfortunately, their misuse has led to injuries and fatalities. So, what I'd say is when they come on the farm, it's important, to get a little bit of training and do some reading and make sure you know how to operate it correctly. It's very important that head protection, buy that helmet with the bike. Make sure, it's just like buying a chainsaw, making sure that you have your helmet and your gear. When you're buying your quad, you need to buy your helmet and you need to use it, and you need to show example where if you have younger people on your farm that they use it also. I suppose a lot of the accidents that are occurring with quads are because people lose control, and they may do that because of lack of experience. They may be carrying a passenger. They may have a load on that's excessive or unbalanced. They may be on terrain that's beyond what the capacity of the machine is, or they don't have the training to be able to manage it at that slope. All these things come together and accidents occur. Sometimes machinery maintenance, so like the quad is there, but maybe how many times do we bring it in to get it serviced? Do we check the tire pressure? Are the brakes working correctly, or is it pulling up even? How, I suppose a lot of people would look at the seat that's on a quad and say, why is it the length it is? And because it's to carry a passenger. But in fact, it's not. It's to be able to move your weight up and down towards the back when you're going down, towards the front when you're going up. It's moving left and right to make sure you're leaning into the turns. It's to maintain stability. All those things come together. And obviously, quads that are on the road traveling at high speed as well. It needs to be specified. It needs to have a spec that's appropriate for the road. It needs to have lights, and it needs to be taxed and insured, Ciarán.
Certainly, they're an implement to be handled with care. This is something we mentioned earlier as well, Francis. But if we think about around the farm at the moment, I suppose the cold snap in particular will put it back into context with slippery surfaces. Doing some of the basics around the farm to leave it a little bit safer. What are the couple of key areas we can focus on there?
Yeah, well, again, from the National Farm Survey, it shows that 64% of the farm accidents happen in the farmyard. So it's a high risk area, and I suppose at the moment where, the weather is cold and we're dealing with frosty conditions. So I'd be saying to people, make sure that you have, clear routes around the farmyard, grit those areas that are a little bit slippy. Slipping on ice, for anyone that it has happened to, if you slip and you fall on concrete, on hard concrete, it can have devastating consequences. And like we all know the places around the farmyard where, we travel multiple times a day, which can be slippy. And we're thinking, sure, listen, we know about it. We're in control of it. We won't fall. But if an accident occurs, you could be out, you could be not able to do your work for a long period of time. So it's important to take action quickly and make sure that, something as simple as a little slit in the concrete could divert the water away, and that area mightn't be freezing. It mightn't have freezing ice on it. Trying to keep, I suppose, water supplies in place. A lot of farmers, when the frost comes, the pipes freeze up, and it means they're going around with buckets and barrels of water for stock. And that's, hard work, time consuming, and has high risk. Electrical repairs are important as well. If there's any bulbs that are blown or, sockets that need to be replaced, get an electrician in, regularly to take a look and to do repairs. And don't be, looking at things that need to be done and waiting for, that optimal time where it's going to happen, because if you don't make it happen, it might never happen. And again, back to maybe preparing for housing. Now is the time, I suppose, we're thinking about the gates and, different things that you might need for that lambing period, starting to put them together, like lubricants, buckets, red lamps, all those things. And I also say to farmers, think about a calving camera as well. You may be able to reduce the number of times you need to go down to the yard, and that might make you happier, give you a bit more sleep and all that. And that'll all help to make life a bit easier and the farm safer.
I think there's something you touched on there is extremely relevant. Putting off that job instead of actually fixing it and moving on from it is something that needs to be maybe focused on a bit more. In terms of investment, and you touched on a few of them there in terms of lighting and different things. Grants available for, like in terms of TAMS grants available for maybe reducing input of labour, certainly in certain aspects. What is available under that, Francis, and how can it be obtained?
So what I would say with this, with that question, Ciarán, is like the main point is to go directly to your advisor and go through all the options. Tell them what you want to do and see what's possible. There's a 60% grant there for a young trained farmer, and then a 40% grant for farmers that don't qualify as a young trained farmer. So the things a lot of sheep farmers are interested in, we talked about the lighting there. If you want to upgrade or put lights into a shed or change lighting, upgrade it, there's a grant aid available for that. Maybe replacing swinging kind of sheeted doors with sliding doors or roller doors. The big one that a lot of sheep farmers are interested in is the sheep handling equipment. You can get those races and turnover crates that can make life an awful lot easier when you're trying to manage, manage sheep. What I would say is the current tranche is finishing in the middle of January. We're not sure what's to happen after that, but it's important to, if you're interested, ask your advisor, talk to them and see what's possible.
The window is quite tight at the moment on that, so it's something we want to get about. I suppose the other thing in focus maybe at the moment is, tax and different bits. There are capital allowances for some of the farm safety investments.
Yeah, so the government recently announced a 5 million resource or pot of money available for accelerated capital allowances for farm safety. So a specific scheme for farm safety. So I suppose the normal capital allowances are 12.5%, but what they're allowing for farm safety equipment is 50% per annum over 2 years. So that means for certain equipment, so examples of that equipment, they're willing to I suppose allow under this scheme is capital or chemical storage cabinets, quick attach mechanisms for 3-point linkages, anti-backing gates, and they're also allowing adaptive equipment to assist farmers with disabilities. So like again, it's what I would encourage people to do is to talk to their advisor and see is there any pieces of equipment under that scheme that might be appropriate. And the government say they're going to, or the minister said they're going to, keep an eye on those lists to see if there are other things that they can include over time.
Okay, it's an investment that certainly will be a benefit to most farmers out there. Francis, just like to come at it maybe from a different angle, and it goes back to where we started about attitude changing things. What resources are available for farmers, and particularly maybe young farmers from Teagasc and other bodies, to maybe upskill themselves in terms of farm safety or make them more aware of some of the issues?
So I suppose one of the main resources that's available is the farm safety risk assessment code of practice training. Now at the moment with COVID, the number of training courses are limited, but hopefully in the new year we'll have more courses available. So we would encourage farmers to take part in that. The farm safety risk assessment document should be filled by each farmer. And any farmers that have any queries about that, it's important to go back to their advisor and talk through them. There's a lot of resources there for younger farmers and for children and for parents that have younger people on the farm that are interested. 21 children that lost their lives in the last 10 years. 81% of those were to do with tractors and machinery. So it's important to get the message out to those young people that this equipment is dangerous. We have resources there like, Staying Safe with Jesse, which is a little book that, parents can read to their children and start the process of talking about farm safety. Teagasc works in partnership with Alma Jordan of Agri Kids. So there's a lot of newsletters and jigsaws and different things available from, on the website there that people can access and download and print off and, talk to their children about it. So there's lots of resources there. It's just a matter of maybe accessing the Teagasc website or talking to your advisor, and they'll be able to steer you in the right direction to find them.
All very useful things to look at. I suppose, Francis, look, something else we mentioned, we talked about animal health. The farmer's own health, we tend to have an older population, but we also work in a difficult environment. But it's a physical job, so it is. It isn't the busy time of year, but a lot of our clients are on mixed farms or heading into a busy spring. Checking out their own health before then, and there's probably a reluctance in doing it in some cases. I think there was a recent study that was quite frightening when we look at some of the figures in terms of health of the farming community we were working with. Yeah,
Ciarán, like I suppose all the studies are coming back to say that, us in the farming community, we need to be aware of our health. We think we have a very healthy lifestyle, which we do, but sometimes we I suppose don't think about the fact that maybe we're not walking as much. With mechanization, things are getting a little bit easier. The study found that 74% of male farmers have 4 or more risk factors for cardiovascular disease. That means really that they're 3 times more likely to have an acute cardiac event like a stroke or heart attack compared to those with fewer risks. So that's a big problem. When you looked in again at lower back pain, it found that 28% of farmers, came back to say that they had lower back pain. So that's a big issue too. And for sheep farmers that are, dealing with sheep, trying to manage sheep, and maybe facilities aren't, as good as they could be, that is a big issue for them over time. It's fine when you're young, but as you get older, things get a bit more difficult. So you need to be thinking about how to make life a little bit easier for yourself and to prevent you having those issues.
Certainly the injuries and the wear and tear, it's all cumulative, so it is.
Yes.
I'm just thinking the other aspect of well-being is the mental well-being. Farming can be a very stressful occupation. It's a very enjoyable occupation, things, but particularly at busy periods, it can be quite stressful. Is it something that's really taken account of enough at farm level among the farming community, do you think, Francis?
Well, again, as I said, like farming as a lifestyle is very positive, but stress can arise. I suppose the last couple of months have been very wet. It's difficult farming. We're dealing with all this online trading and trying to, do we bring the sheep to the market? Do we go in? Do we not go in? How do we manage it? Are we confident in how it's all working? All the fluctuation in farm prices, the financial worries, the long working hours, all the isolation. Really, we're not able to make contact with each other as much as we used to. It all has an impact. And I suppose what I would say to people is to use their mobile phones to ring each other. If you're not having an issue, you're probably the person that I'd be encouraging to ring somebody else, and talk about the stuff that's happening at the moment and how you're dealing with it, to a farmer that might like to get that call, someone that you normally met most days, but now can't in the same way. So that little time with a phone call can make a big difference. And back to what you were saying earlier, Ciarán, that regular health check by a health professional, is very, very important to make sure that things aren't, I suppose, missed. With COVID and everything, people can, I suppose, struggle along. But it's important to take the time to go and get yourself checked out. Make sure you're getting plenty of food, plenty of sleep. Have that first aid box there if you need it, and make sure the mobile phone is charged and use it.
I think something you highlighted there, like the mobile phone charging, is but making contact with others at the moment, particularly in the cold weeks and the season we're heading into, is something very important to keep in mind. Francis, you covered a lot of ground for us there. Certainly there's plenty of things we can focus on, and a lot of it is doing the basics right. Thanks very much for your time today and your insights in that whole area.
Thank you very much, Ciarán.
Okay, we'll have to finish things up at this point. Again, it's a topic of relevance to us all in the industry at all times. Improving awareness, reducing some of the risks, hopefully will help reduce the level of injuries and accidents we see at farm level. It's something very important and something needs to be in focus in the industry at all times. We do include a segment on health and safety in the Teagasc Sheep newsletter that comes out each month. Again, it focuses on a particular topic as one of relevance. There's a lot more information in the various sections on the Teagasc website in each of the different industries. And hopefully we'll get Francis back on at a later point during the year. Again, I would like to thank him for the time he took today to go through that with us. That's it for this episode. Again, for any further updates on the Sheep Programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to any of our episodes.